All right, so that's working, which is good to know. Wasn't even really ready to officially begin, but here we are. So there it is. Um, let's see. That's weird because this little part here doesn't usually come up. Let's see. Adjusting the mic. Microphone is on, so of course communication. All right. Lights up. That's a bit much. I have not been able since for a while now, since I made a couple of adjustments, I have not been able to get back that exact shade of lighting um, that I so enjoyed. I know a lot of you did too, but we're working on it. We'll get there. That's not hitting it. It's interesting, but it's not quite doing what it's supposed to do. How is everyone this evening? Everybody doing good? Oh, let me see the comments, then I can see how everyone is doing this evening. I see Angel Monique is here. I see we've got Mimi Brown. Hello, Mimi Brown. I see Kitty Foxy, who recently celebrated a birthday. Happy birthday again, Kitty Foxy. We see Terry Meredith is here. Hi, Terry. Good to see you. Meant to hit you up actually earlier today, Sister Meredith, because you have a story that I think fits in for this period, the Black. And I'd like to solicit your permission to read that perhaps Thursday, along with another piece. So we can talk about that after the show. I see Just Marsha is here. I see Process to Purpose is here. And that is not a name that I recall seeing before, but it's good to see you, Process to Purpose. Tanya Horton is here joining us on YouTube. Erica Goodman joining us on YouTube. It's good to see all of you here. Let's go ahead and make one other little change. There we go. So yeah, the pre-read for the last couple of weeks has been unofficial. We're not doing it like we used to do it. It hasn't been a full sort of show. The sort of live ad hoc podcast on Writing While Black. Reason why? Haven't been doing as much writing, just a lot of being Black. And, that by itself can be exhausting enough. And so there hasn't been a lot to discuss in that area. Also, I've been working on a lot of things. The growth and the development of Storytime with Julian and associated properties is true. Terry Meredith is having a field day with my particular my particular little nuances and how I speak. Storytime with Julian is very important to me. The development and the growth of it, continuing to expand on what we do, to make sure we've got new programs to try and follow through on the promises that I've made as I started this. And a lot of that takes time. And also I'm trying to, not to put too fine a point on it, I'm trying to expand my territory. There is more for me to do in this space. There's more for me to do in this space to create more opportunities for all of us. And so I'm doing a lot of things behind this little curtain of mine. And not to put, I'm up to some pretty ambitious shit. But that means a lot of failure. And so what I've been doing is trying to mitigate that failure, to have as much of those failures happen in private as possible, to have as many of those disappointments occur off camera as possible, so as to not affect the integrity of what we do here, so as to not diminish my own or your enthusiasm for what we do here. So Storytime with Julian and whatever associated shifts, turns, and twists have come along, when things don't quite look or feel the same as they used to, it's because I'm up to some shit. But as always, we keep it going. Let's see. I see that, hey, Marky Perkins, and I think I know who Marky Perkins is. I think she be in the kitchen. sometimes if I'm thinking of the right person. You know, a lot of y'all have different names on the Book of Faces than you do in other places, and so I sometimes get you confused. Um, I don't have my good clock here with me. It's on the other side. So let's see. Shoot. Looks like it's about 9:25 or so. How is it that I'm all the way over here and I don't have a single? Hey, all right. I got a single device that keeps the time. So that's cool. So it's 9:27. We have until 10 o'clock to go officially, but this is probably going to be much shorter than that. So as I was saying, I've been trying to keep the failures off camera so that it doesn't affect this show too much. This show, not the pre-read, but story time with Julian, while I work on developing and building some other things. Some days it's so yes, Marky is homie Lou. That's what I thought. Some days it's more successful than others. Today has been a bit of a mixed bag. I had some significant successes. I had some disappointments as well. But it's all good. It's all good. Just know that I am putting all of my energy, every bit of this energy that I can afford, that I can spare, into growing and building this. So even if there are periods where you don't see a lot of movement or you don't see a lot of highly visible growth, don't take that as stagnation. But the purpose of this period, the purpose of the pre-read has always been to get me all the way together. Make sure the lights are working, make sure the camera's working, make sure the microphone is on. So of course, communication, make sure all of those things are happening. But the other part of getting me all the way together is make sure that I'm okay and ready to present. Not just that I am in full voice, but hello, Donathan. Come here, baby. Come here. Get up there. Go on, lie down. Oh, you can't jump because my footstool's in the way. Okay, now get up there. No, I don't want you here. I want you there. Go there. You are so much smarter than you're acting right now. Up. Yes, there. Yes, up. There you go. Now lie down. Thank you. Sorry. Donnie gets restless and starts walking around and making a lot of noise and rumbling, and probably he's going to need to go potty. So that means that this is going to be a shorter pre-read than it was already planning to be, because I realized I did not take him out, which is something that I usually do. Well, I took him out earlier, but it was not. He gets one right before the show, and he knows he gets one right before the show. So when the lights change color, even though he's a dog and probably doesn't know what color the lights are, he knows that it's showtime. Anyway, none of that is terribly significant for the 19 of you all who are here. But I was saying that the other part of getting me all the way together is getting me together here in this space. So I'm going to do that right now. Hey now, said Simple one hot Monday evening. Man, I had a fine weekend. What did you do? Me and Joyce went to Orchard Beach. Good bathing? I don't know. I did not take a bath. I did not take the cold water. What did you do then? Just lie in the sun? I did not, said Simple. I don't like the violent rays tampering with my complexion. I just laid back in the shade while Joyce spouted on the bench, wetting her toes to show off her pretty white bathing suit. In other words, you relaxed. Relaxed is right, said Simple. I had myself a great big, nice, cool quarter beer, so I just laid back in the shade and relaxed. I also wrote myself some poetries. Poetry, I said. Yes, said Simple. Want to hear it? Indeed I do. I will read you number 1. Here it is. Sitting under the trees with the birds and the bees, watching the girls go by. How do you like it? Is that all? That's enough, said Simple. You ought to have another rhyme, I said. By ought to rhyme with sky or something. I was not looking at no sky. As I told you in the poem, I was looking at the girls. Well, anyhow, what else did you write? The next one is a killer, said Simple. It's serious. I got to thinking about how if I didn't have to ride Jim Crow, I might go down home for my vacation. And I looked around me out yonder at Orchard Beach, and almost everybody on that beach, besides me and Joyce, was foreigners, New York foreigners. They were speaking Italian, German, Yiddish, Spanish, Puerto Rican, and everything but English. So I got to thinking how any one of them foreigners could visit my home state down south and ride anywhere they want to on the trains, except with me. So I wrote this poem, which I will now read it to you. Listen. I wonder how it can be that Greeks, Germans, Jews, Italians, Mexicans, and everybody but me down south can ride in the trains, streetcars, and buses without any fusses. But when I come along, pure American, they got to sign up for me to ride behind. Colored. My folks and my folkses and their folkses before have been here 300 years or more. Yet any foreigner from Polish to Dutch rides anywhere he wants to and is not subject to such treatments as my fellow men give me in this land of the free. Dixie, you ought to get wise and be civilized and take down that colored sign for Americans to ride behind. Signed, Jesse B. Simple. How do you like that? Did you write it yourself or did Joyce help you? Every word of it I writ myself, said Simple. Joyce wanted me to change folkses and say peoples, but I did not have an eraser. It would have been longer too, but Joyce made me stop and go with her to get some hot dogs. It's long enough, I said. It's not as long as Jim Crow, said Simple. You didn't write any nature poems at all? I asked. What do you mean, nature poems? I mean about the great out of doors, the flowers, the birds, the trees, the country. To tell the truth, I was never much on country, said Simple. I had enough of it when I was down home. Besides, in the country, flies bother you, bees sting you, mosquitoes bite you, and snakes hide in the grass. No, I do not like the country, except a riverbank to fish near town. It's better than staying in the city, I said, and spending your money around these Harlem bars. At least I am welcome in these bars, run by white folks though they are, said Simple. But I do not know no place in the country where I am welcome. If you drive in every little roadhouse you stop at, they look at you like you was a varmint and say, we don't serve colored. I tell you, I do not want no parts of the country in this country. You do not go to the country to drink, I said. What am I going to do? Hibernate? You could lie in a hammock and read a book, then go in the house and eat chicken. I do not know anybody in the country around here. And you know these summer resort places up north don't admit colored. Besides, the last time I was lying out in a hammock reading the funnies in the country down in Virginia, it were in the cool of evening. And man, a snake as long as you is tall came whipping through the grass, grabbed a frog right in front of my eyes, and started to choking it down. What did you do? Mighty near fell out that hammock, said Simple. If the snake had not been so near, I would have fell out. As it was, I stepped down quick on the other side and went to find myself a stone. Did you kill it? My nerves were bad and my aim was off. I hit the frog instead of the snake. I knocked that frog right out of his mouth. What did the snake do? Run and hid himself in the grass. He was scared to go outdoors all the rest of the time I was in the country. You are... I used the wrong pronoun. Hold up. What did the snake do? Run and hid himself in the grass. I was scared to go outdoors all the rest of the time I was in the country. You are that scared of a snake? I said. As scared of a snake as a Russian was of a Nazi. I would go to all as much trouble to kill one as Stalin did to kill Hitler. Besides, that poor little frog were not bothering that snake. Frogs eat mosquitoes and mosquitoes eat me. So I am for letting that frog live and not be ate. But a snake would chaw on my leg as quick as he would a frog. So I am for letting a snake die. Anything that bites me must die. Snakes, bed bugs, bees, mosquitoes, or bears. I don't even much like for a woman to bite me, though I would not go so far as to kill her. But all of the things that bites, two is worse, a mad dog and a snake. But I would take the dog. I could never understood how in the Bible Eve got near enough to a snake to take an apple. Snakes did not bite in those days, I said. That was the age of innocence. It was only after Eve got a hold of the apple that everything got wrong, huh? Snakes started to bite, women start to fight, men to paying, and Christians to praying, said Simple. It were awful after Eve approached that snake and accepted that apple. It takes a woman to do a fool thing like that. Adam ate it too, didn't he? A woman can make a fool out of a man, said Simple. But don't let's start talking about women. We have talked about enough unpleasant things for one night. Will you kindly invite me to go into the bar to have a beer? This sidewalk is hot to my feet. And as a thank you for a drink, the next time I write a poem, I will give you a copy. But it won't be about the country, neither about nature. As much beer as you drink, it will probably be about a bar, I said. When are you going to wake up, fella, and get wise to yourself, settle down, marry Joyce, and stop all this gallivanting all over Harlem every night? You're old enough to know better. I might be old enough to know better, but I am not old enough to do better, said Simple. Come on in the bar and I will say you a toast that I made up the last time somebody told me just what you are saying now about doing better. That's right. Bartender, 2 beers for 2 steers. Thank you. Pay for 'em, chum. Now, here goes. Listen fluently. When I get to be 91 and my running days is done, then I will do better. When I get to be 92 and just can't do, I'll do better. When I gets to be 93, if the women's don't love me, then I must do better. When I get to be 94 and can't jive no more, I'll have to do better. When I get to be 95, more dead than alive, it will be necessary to do better. When I get to be 96 and I don't know no more tricks, I reckon I'll do better. When I get to be 97 and on my way to heaven, I'll try and do better. When I get to be 98 and see St. Peter at the gate, I know I'll do better. When I get to be 99, remembering it were fine, then I'll do better. But even when I'm 101, if I am still having fun, I'll start all over again just like I begun, because what could be better? And thus endeth the story. And thus also endeth the pre-read. It's about 9:41. That gives me enough time to get Donnie up and out, get some imbibement for later on. We're going to be reading from My Soul to Keep by Tananarive Due. We're going to be reading excerpts from this book from part 3 of this trilogy. So for those of you all who are big fans of hers, please stick around after the break. But right now, I'm just going to go ahead and put on the brand screen while we pause things for a little while. Take your time, go out, come back about 5 minutes before the hour. You'll start to see the countdown screen. But In the meantime, I've got to go take care of this little pup star. All right. Thanks for coming out to the pre-read. Thank you for helping me get myself together. I hope you enjoyed it. It looks like y'all did. I'll read the comments a little later on. Peace. Nope. Hold on. Now I'm Hey, what's happening, y'all, and welcome to Storytime with Julian. I am the Julian in question, and this Storytime is a continuation of our spooky series. I don't want to call it horror because a lot of these stories are not, in fact, horror. They are more, hold on a second, got a little extra neckwear right here. Let's get that off. All right. Because a lot of these stories are not, in fact, horror. What they are chilling, thrilling, eerie, creepy. And so I'm just going to kind of put it all under this nebulous title, spooky. Point of fact, I don't actually do horror. I don't particularly like horror stories as a genre, despite the fact that some would argue I have written a horror story. I would call it light horror, maybe light trembling of sorts. But definitely not really a thing that I do. But I have been very attracted to and very drawn to some of the authors that we've covered here during Storytime with Julian, who do write in that genre and who dabble close to that genre. We have read quite a bit of Nalo Hopkinson, who I think with stories like Slow Cold Chick, that's maybe a little bit more because of the creep factor on the horror side. We've read, of course, Octavia Butler, who is a master of that. And the story, The Morning and the Evening and the Night, definitely I think qualifies as horror. In fact, I have plotted out in my head how that might be extended for an entire feature film. I can see it, and I think it would be absolutely amazing. So we've covered a number of stories that speak to that world. I think some of the work even of Edwidge Dandicat with Crick Crack, while it's not necessarily horror, it falls under the genre of the macabre. And then, of course, there's some of the stories from Friday Black, like what we just read last week, the titular story from that collection by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, that deals in that genre, that kind of tests those limits of what horror can be. The story that we are reading tonight, or I really should say the excerpt that we are reading tonight, comes from an author who does in fact write in the horror genre, and she has a collection of short stories that are definitely along in that bent. And we've actually read her work before. Now, the piece that we read before was from the collection Gumbo. The author is, of course, Tananarive Due. And the piece that we read before was The Knowing, which was not a horror story, but was definitely a kind of chilling, catch your throat story. A little bit like, I would say in terms of tone and nature, it occurred for me not dissimilar from the film The Sixth Sense. The Sixth Sense. But what we're reading tonight is an excerpt from her collection. It's sort of a trilogy of stories put together as one novel, and it's called My Soul to Keep. And we will be reading a few chapters from part 3 of my Soul to Keep, which is called The Covenant. Now, for those of you who are completists, who might plan on getting this book but haven't read it yet, and who are concerned about any spoilers, I would caution you that tonight is probably not a good night to listen, because this story is kind of coming literally about the middle of the book. So some characters have been established. There are some things that are already known, but I am assured by one of my editors who read through this for me, because this is a cold read, but who read this and in fact actually gifted this book to me. But I'm assured by one of my editors who read through this for me that this section that we're planning on reading tonight is going to be a nice little self-contained, more than an amuse-bouche, but not a full meal. So you're getting a nice little self-contained, this is tapas, okay? We're going to do some story time spooky series tapas. to whet your appetite. And if you have not yet purchased this book or investigated its author, perhaps you will be inclined to do so. All right. So that's kind of the pre-mumble for all of this. And we are going to begin with excerpts from The Covenant, Part 3 of My Soul to Keep. Tea cake? Here, kitty. Come here, kitty, kitty. Dawood's whisper call was the loudest sound in the calm of the yard, which was wrapped in a darkness reminiscent of the heart of a woodland. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and when Dawood awakened, he expected to find the creature curled at the foot of their bed in his usual spot. But he was gone, tonight of all nights. He wasn't in the bedroom chair. He wasn't sleeping on his favorite bookshelf at the foot of the stairs. He wasn't flopped across Kira, and he wasn't warming himself against the refrigerator vent on the shiny kitchen linoleum. Was the animal psychic? Tea-Cake always seemed to know exactly when Jessica's car would drive up in the evenings, no matter how early or late. He posted himself at the front window to wait for her. Even Kira had noticed this, and she would shout, "Tea-Cake says Mommy's coming." Perhaps Tea-Cake had altered his habits because he sensed what was to come. "Tea-Cake, where are you?" Dawood's Durabeam flashlight, part of the hurricane season stockpile collected by Jessica, swept across the yard's countless leaves and blooms, pebbles on the pathway, isolated blades of grass, and the rims of the Tempo's tires. Dawood crouched beneath the vehicle to search for the cat, smelling the pungence of collected motor oil. Only asphalt and pebbles, the same beneath the van. God damn it. He shouldn't have waited this long. Until the night before the weekend trip. He should have done it sooner. Dawood wiped nervous perspiration from his face and glanced at the glowing hands of his watch. He'd already been up for 10 minutes. If Jessica sensed even subconsciously that he'd left the bed, she would ask him questions. So far, he'd been pretty good about limiting his work to 20 minutes a night, or even better, to the daylight hours when Jessica and Kira were away. Jessica was a sound sleeper, but he did not want to risk making her suspicious of him at the one time she would need to trust him most of all. Where was that fucking cat? Mr. DeKnight or someone would probably call the police if he kept creeping around his yard with a flashlight. At the last homeowners association meeting, the neighborhood watch president warned them that an intruder had been sighted lingering on the streets after dark. Probably Mahmoud, Dawood thought. Mahmoud was no doubt observing him at this very instant, wondering what he was up to. Tea-Cake. As he climbed the rocky embankment in the center of the yard, the flashlight's wide beam found the mouth of the cave, drawing exaggerated shadows cast from overgrown weeds, moss, and jutting stone. The cave was another of Tea-Cake's favorite spots, but usually during the day. Would he have come at night? Dawood squatted at the entrance and poked the flashlight inside. He heard a loud even before the light sought out the corner where Tea-Cake was crouched. His tail puffed like a chimney brush. The cat bared his teeth and hissed again. Tea-Cake's eyes glowed a luminescent red in the beam. "It's just me, dummy," Dawood said in a soothing tone. "This is how you show gratitude for 6 years of free room and board, you little miscreant." Tea-Cake recognized his voice. He flicked his tail around himself and mewed, then gnawed at something irritating his front paw. "So are you coming out or am I coming in?" Dawood asked. Tea-Cake licked himself, not moving otherwise. Cats were so blasted contrary. Dawood steadied himself with one hand against the low-hanging stone at the mouth and climbed down the narrow makeshift steps into the cave. Dawood kneeled and scratched Tea-Cake beneath his chin, eliciting a garbled purr, then scooped up the cat under one arm. "You should be grateful to me," Dawood muttered, kissing Tea-Cake's nose as he grabbed his flashlight with his free hand before standing. "I have an invaluable gift for you." The shed on the north side of the house was a tacky remnant of the previous owner, fashioned after a wooden barn painted dark red inside. Dot housed the lawnmower, his toolbox, the pruning shears, the stepladder, and an array of items that didn't fit in the house, including the tricycle Kira had outgrown. She'd been promised a bigger bicycle with training wheels for Christmas. After flicking on the overhead 60-watt bulb, Dot closed the shed door and dropped tea cake on top of the cracked plastic outdoor table they had replaced years before. Immediately, Tea Cake jumped down to sniff the floor and a half-dozen withering dead lizards scattered across the concrete. He began to sniff at one of the petrified carcasses. "Don't do that, it's poisonous," Dot warned from habit, shooing away the cat from the lizard with his foot. In the past week, Dot had made a new workspace in the shed. He'd arranged the table, a wooden folding chair, and a radio he kept tuned to a music station that played jazz after midnight. The shed resembled a laboratory at this point, making Dot wonder if he wasn't some sort of mad scientist. Was Mahmoud right in his assessment? Was he a madman by now? Dot peeked under the lid of a hole-poked shoebox he'd left on top of the chair. Inside, resting on a bed of dry grass, was a large gray lizard Dot had named Satchmo. Satchmo scurried around in the box, a noise that prompted Tea Cake to prop himself up on his hind legs to try and see inside. "Evening, Satchmo," Dot said, smiling. Still alive. But he'd known the lizard would be fine. The morning before, when he'd found Satchmo's belly contracting with rapid breaths, those shiny black eyes wide open, Dot had trembled with disbelief. Then he'd felt an overwhelming sense of power as he understood what it meant. He had done it. Satchmo would always be fine. Dot lifted the box and cracked the door of the shed open so that he could toss the lizard to freedom. "Go, Satchmo," Dot said, flinging the contents of the box out into the dark. "Have a good life, my friend." Tea Cake tried to race out to chase the lizard, but Dot closed the door before the cat could say, "Sorry, compadre," he apologized. "You'll leave a bit later. I promise." Dot reached behind the ladder in the corner to find the paper bag hiding his cache of hypodermic needles, house-cleaning chemicals, and pesticides. He'd killed at least 10 lizards so far in his quest to find an injection that was quickly lethal, yet not so instantaneous that his subject would be dead before Dot could complete the most critical portion of his task. Satchmo, with a belly full of ammonia, had been the first to live. Ammonia would not do for Tea Cake, Dot had decided. He had no way of determining how much of the chemical would be necessary to induce a quick death, so he'd chosen another compound that killed the lizards quickly, rubbing alcohol, with its deadly isopropanol. He'd considered turpentine and rat poison, which he believed would act more quickly, but those agents might have been more painful to Tea Cake's system. Not that the alcohol would be painless, he surmised, but it would impair Tea Cake's central nervous system and lead to a coma, so the animal's pain might be brief. He hoped so, at least. The less noise Tea Cake made, the better. His wails might awaken Jessica and Kira, which would be disastrous. Dot laid both needles he had prepared on the weathered patio table. One contained the full dose of the isopropyl alcohol, the other, a small sample of Dot's blood, which he had drawn earlier that day. The blood inside the hypodermic's plastic casing was still noticeably warm to his touch. Dot rested his index finger against it, savoring the heat, still fascinated by its mysterious properties. Next, Dot turned on the radio and heard the deliciously lazy tenor saxophone of John Coltrane. He sat in the chair, listening to the piece to identify it. It took him 2 seconds. A love supreme, of course. And wasn't it fitting? He wished he could relax and enjoy the music rather than face the task ahead. Dot gazed across the shed at Tea Cake, who was still sitting in front of the closed door, looking back at Dot expectantly. Seeing that Dot had noticed him, Tea Cake cried to be let out. His voice sounded like a child's. A single tear ran down Dot's cheek. What insanity was this? How could he torture and possibly murder a beloved family pet? And for what? On the belief, perhaps mistaken, that he had recalled the life incantation he first heard pass from Khaldun's lips? And what next? Would he do the same to his wife and child? From habit, under his breath, Dodd began to recite the simple Hebrew phrases he had dragged from the recesses of his memory. The blood is the vessel for life. The blood flows without end as a river through the valley of death. Khaldun no doubt had believed Dodd remained unconscious when he performed the life ritual on the last of his brethren in the underground temple. Dodd was not supposed to have heard those words. None of his other brethren had, he imagined, so perhaps that was why none had attempted to bring anyone into their life fellowship. He alone had heard. The instant Satchmo's ammonia-filled belly stopped its faint movement, Dodd had injected him with the blood from his veins and recited those simple words. By morning, when Dodd returned, Satchmo was awake. Again, Dodd glanced at his watch. He had already been away from Jessica for nearly 20 minutes. He must begin his work, or else the ritual might find him still here by morning. Dodd played with the plunger of the clear syringe until the liquid inside crept to the tip of the needle in a bead. He held it slowly in his right hand and kneeled beside Tea Cake, stroking the cat's head. I wish there were another way, Dodd said to Jessica's cat. And what's the harm of it, really? Why hadn't he done the same with Princess when he watched his dog writhe on the veterinarian's exam table and take her last shallow breaths? He should have had his blood waiting for Princess. Or dear Adele. But now Dodd's vision was blurred by tears. In a quick motion with one arm, he lifted Tea Cake beneath the front legs to expose the soft fur of his underbelly. Estimating where the cat's stomach rested, he jabbed the needle deeply into it, pushing the plunger in with all his might. Tea Cake howled, and Dot felt the cat's claws slash furiously against his face near his eyes before Tea Cake thrust himself away from Dot with his strong hind legs. Tea Cake nearly stumbled over himself in his terrified effort to run from Dot, scrambling behind a cardboard Christmas tree box in the corner of the shed. He made low, threatening sounds that resembled growling. Cursing, Dot touched his face, bleeding. He was lucky the animal hadn't scratched his eyes out. Would one injection be enough to work quickly? He didn't know. He wanted to inject Tea Cake once more to be certain, but he didn't relish the thought of another encounter with those sharp claws. Tea Cake was a much hardier opponent than any of the lizards had been. From his sanctuary, Tea Cake's growls turned into frightened cries. Perhaps he was already in pain, or simply confused. Dot prayed he would not be too loud, or he would have to chase Tea Cake and knock the beast unconscious. This was already difficult. Mahmoud was wrong. There was no sport in killing for him, and killing a loved one, even a pet, was more daunting than he had imagined. Why hadn't he simply asked for a tranquilizer from the vet so Tea Cake would not suffer? It would have required an explanation, but he could have gone to the trouble for Tea Cake's sake. He would need more merciful methods in the future, he decided. Much more merciful. Thankfully, after a few more minutes, Tea Cake was silent. Then Dot heard the animal make retching noises. The first dose of poison was doing its work. What are you doing? Jessica asked Dot, trailing him as he walked out of the house carrying 2 duffel bags to the minivan. She'd been watching morning cartoons with Kira in the living room when she noticed him pass through with the bags. He detected accusation in her voice. We're taking a trip, he announced, smiling. Who is? You and me, babe. It's all set up. He hoisted the bags into the van's cargo bin, grunting. B's taking Kira for the weekend. Then you and I are camping out in the Everglades for 2 days, away from civilization. I found a guy who rents a cabin out there. It's great. You have to ride an airboat to get there. Behind Jessica, Kira giggled. Did you know about this? Jessica asked, turning to look at her. Kira nodded, smiling. I'm sleeping at Grandma's. It took all of Dot's energy to maintain his jovial exterior, since his spirits had been crushed all morning. He'd been so methodical, holding up a mirror to Tea Cake's nose to gauge exactly when his breathing stopped, checking for the cat's pulse, injecting the blood exactly as he had with Satchmo. He'd said the incantation slowly, not stumbling over the words. Yet, at dawn, when he'd stolen back outside to check on the cat's progress in the shed, he lifted the towel he'd spread over Tea Cake and found him lying motionless, his glazed-over eyes open, his joints already stiff with oncoming rigor mortis. Still dead. Only 5 hours had passed. Perhaps it was still too early. No, Dodd told himself. He had to face facts. He had killed the fucking cat. Another family catastrophe he would have to deal with when he returned from the weekend with Jessica. That is, if Jessica would return with him at all after he found the courage to reveal what he intended. Tea Cake's death, realistically, was the least of his worries at the moment. The future of his family was very much at stake. He had not mentioned the trip in the house, nor used any of the household telephones to plan or discuss it, because he hoped to keep their destination a secret from Mahmoud. Mahmoud's ears were everywhere. Dot would need privacy for his days away with Jessica. He hoped Mahmoud did not suspect what he was up to. If only Tea Cake had lived. That could have served as evidence enough in his own mind, and in Jessica's, that he could be trusted to carry out the life ritual on human beings. What now? What was the purpose of revealing everything to Jessica if he could not ask her to join him with Kira? But he must. Mahmoud would certainly return. Clearly, he had threatened to harm Jessica and Kira, and Dodd had no doubt in his sincerity. Mahmoud had been soft-hearted when Dodd first met him, often hesitating with his spear when he should have struck. But the years had changed Mahmoud. The years had changed them all. He would have to explain why their departure must be sudden, and not to France after all. The searchers would find them without much trouble in France. He must take them to Africa, somewhere they could easily vanish for years. Could he expect Jessica to agree to such a thing? I like your nerve, planning a trip without even asking me, Jessica said, startling Dot from his thoughts as he arranged the duffel bags. What if I had big plans for the weekend? You don't have any plans, and you know it. Isn't the Everglades a swamp? We're camping in a swamp. Swamps are very romantic and secluded. There aren't many people there, only alligators, Dodd said, and Kira squealed in mock fright. Jessica nodded. Uh-huh. Well, do you know that quote by Jerry Seinfeld? Sometimes the road less traveled is less traveled for a reason. Who's Jerry Seinfeld? Dodd asked. Jessica rolled her eyes. Never mind. Kira tugged on Dodd's belt loop. Is it time to go, Daddy? Stand back, Pumpkin, Dodd said, and he slammed the rear hatch closed on the van before turning to Jessica to hold her shoulders. You're not mad, are you? She shook her head. I guess most people would kill to have a husband who'd plan a surprise weekend trip. I'm slightly speechless, that's all. Good, he said, kissing her forehead. Then go upstairs and get dressed. I think I packed most of what you need, but you can see what I overlooked. Hurry, though. We have to drive way out west about 60 miles. The guy's meeting us at the Big Cypress National Preserve with his airboat at noon. If we miss him, we'll never get to the island. What about I've packed plenty of food. Plus, it's an island, so there's fishing. And he has poles at the cabin. What about tea cake, Daddy? Kira asked suddenly. Dodd's stomach sank, but his smile remained frozen on his face as he massaged Kira's scalp. We'll leave the kitty door unlatched for him. I've left 2 days' worth of food and water. Let's just trust the raccoons won't get to it first. I'm going to find him and say bye-bye, Kira said, turning to sprint back into the house. Jessica wrapped her arms around Dodd's middle and snuggled her face against his bare chest. She kissed his nipple. A secluded island, David? You're amazing. And what a great public relations tactic letting Kira stay with Mom for the weekend. Mom, of course, won't say anything, but she's very upset about this idea that we could move. That we will move. And that's what I meant, Jessica said. Dodd patted Jessica's firm backside. Go on in and get dressed, mi vida. I need to put a few more things in the van. Then we can get out of here. "'Kay," Jessica said, looking up at him with a girlish smile. "This is going to be great. You shall be adequately rewarded for your creativity and spontaneity. Did you pack the massage oil?" Her eagerness made Dodd sad. He shook his head slowly. "Then you didn't think of everything, did you?" she asked, squeezing his cheek as she jogged back into the house with a giddy step that reminded Dodd of Kira's. His wife, in so many ways, was still so much like a child. She possessed the sort of abandon he'd forgotten many natural lifetimes ago, and he loved that about her. He wished he could lose himself inside it. Very soon, Jessica would be forced to grow up in a fashion most people could never imagine. How would it change her? To keep worries from afflicting him, Dodd concentrated on the details. He had his hiking boots, his razors, the flashlight, bread, fruit, leftover KFC, crackers, soda, flour to fry up any fish he might catch, the cast iron skillet, a saucepan. The cabin's owner said that he had cooking utensils, but Dodd wanted to bring his own just to be sure. He wanted dinner tonight to be special, because it very well could be the last pleasant moment he might share with his wife for a long time. What else would he need from this trip, miracles aside? Ah, yes, his battery-operated CD player and radio. They must have music. "David?" Jessica's voice floated to him from Kira's bedroom window as he stood in the front yard. He looked up but could not see her behind the gray screen. "Have you seen the cat?" "I'll take a quick look around," he said, waving up to her. No, he had not seen the cat in at least an hour. Perhaps that hour had made the difference. Dodd prayed it had, but he knew he was only fooling himself as he trudged to the shed. Inside, he gazed at the lump beneath the fading beach towel. No change. To be sure, he lifted the towel to examine the cat. Tea Cake's eyes were still open, muddy pupils completely dilated, which meant the light was not affecting them. He gently poked at Tea Cake's rib cage and shoulder blade. He lifted one paw and watched it flip back to the concrete floor as though it were elastic. Unless it was his imagination, Tea Cake's joint seemed slightly more pliant, offering less resistance, but he couldn't be certain. He was probably only seeing what he wanted to see. "Better you than my wife or child," he muttered to the corpse. "But I wish you'd lived, Tea Cake. You don't know how much." Dodd sighed and once again buried the animal beneath the towel. He lifted his portable CD player and was about to leave when he remembered his most valuable supply, an 8-inch hunting knife with a wide blade. He pushed aside wood scraps, goggles, and dusk masks on his tool table until he found the knife, which he'd bought 2 years before and never removed from its leather sheath. The purchase had been on a whim. This weekend, he would finally need that knife. The thought itself made Dodd shudder with dread. "Did you find him, Daddy?" Kira asked when Dodd walked into the house through the back door. She had her Minnie Mouse overnight bag slung over her shoulder, and she'd taken an impatient stance with one hand planted on her little hip and her head cocked far to the side. Dodd wished he had time to find his camera so he could take a photograph of her. No sign of Tea Cake. I'm sure he'll turn up. He's probably just out making friends. Hearing this, Kira looked downhearted, biting her bottom lip. "Did you look in the cave too?" Jessica asked, appearing with her African purse and a handful of paperbacks. "I looked everywhere, Jess, but I'm sure he's fine. You know, animals can sense changes like an impending trip. Maybe this is just Tea Cake's way of voicing his displeasure." "Well, he never has before," Jessica murmured. After a last search of all the closets and cabinets to make sure Tea Cake hadn't locked himself up somewhere, the lights were turned off and the house was closed up, and the three of them piled into the van to begin their weekend adventures. Dodd noticed Kira's face in his rearview mirror. She was staring out of the back seat window at the yard, obviously hoping to catch a glance of the cat. Guilt-ridden, Dodd looked away and started the engine. "Don't worry about Tea Cake, hon," Dodd said softly. Jessica lifted the hunting knife from the dashboard, turning the sheath over in her hands. Yo, running deer. What's this for? Planning to track some game while we're in the woods? Don't underestimate my hunting prowess, my love. Well, my grandmother used to fix us squirrel and rabbit, but I think I'll stick to more conventional stuff if you don't mind. You ate bunnies? Kira asked, making a face. A long time ago. Wabbit stew, like Elmer Fudd. But I'm not gonna let Daddy force me to eat any rabbits. Squirrels either. Any chance you might catch a wild filet mignon out there, David? Again, Dot tried to smile, but he didn't answer. As he backed to the end of the driveway and swerved around to follow their winding street, he felt momentary release, unexpected promise. His family was with him in the safety of this enclosed vehicle, and he could simply drive them anywhere if he chose. Tea Cake, in this isolated moment, was not yet gone for good in their minds. His family loved him, and he was still David, if only for now. Would they love Dot too? Or would they think him a monster? And truthfully, wasn't he only a monster, an abomination in the end? Behind Dot to whisper, "When are you and Mommy coming back?" Kira asked, leaning behind Dot to whisper in his ear as he drove. Dot nearly chastised Kira for not wearing her seatbelt, but he enjoyed the scent of the baby shampoo from her hair, a sweet lemon, and he could not bring himself to ask her to move away. "Very soon, hun," Dodd said, his throat tight. "We'll be back so soon, you won't even realize we were gone." Soon after David drove past the campus of Florida International University on State Road 41 to Miami Trail, the sprawl of the suburbs flew behind them, replaced by a canal rushing alongside the two-lane road and nothing but trees and brushes ahead as far as Jessica could see. She smiled, resting her hand on David's knee. Did he feel the sudden freedom too? Like taking a gasp of pure air after being locked in a musty room? She felt a liberation that was like a dose of some sort of drug, a euphoric high. The wilderness of the Everglades had always been nearby, even when she was a child, but she'd never explored it, never ventured far from the safety of what she knew. She'd come out here a few years before to write a story about a Mikosuke activist, but they never came to camp. Hell, she hadn't camped since he was a Girl Scout. The idea of camping made her imagine the scent of marshmallows roasted with chocolate, sandwiched between graham crackers. Good old s'mores. The memories also evoked the scent of bug spray. "Shit," she said, tightening her fingers around David's kneecap. He too was in a trance. He looked at her, his eyebrows arched. "Did you pack any bug spray? The mosquitoes will be murder." "I think so. If not, we'll pick some up," he said. Jessica would have preferred a flight to the Bahamas or Jamaica, truth be told. An Everglades Island hideaway was a romantic thought, but not necessarily in the middle of May. She was surprised David hadn't considered what a pain the mosquitoes would be. But then again, she knew this trip wasn't going to be a vacation in the truest sense. David hadn't been the same since the visit from Mahmoud, so he wasn't exactly in a fun and sun mood. And David's silence today definitely meant he had something on his mind. That was all right. She'd learned that if she gave him enough time, he'd eventually bring up whatever was bothering him. Maybe he wanted seclusion to do it. She figured he was going to try and push her to leave Miami within the next 2 weeks, as he'd hinted. But she couldn't agree to that. Kira's school term would be finished in a month, and she couldn't understand his hurry. It didn't make sense to pull Kira out of school early. A month wouldn't matter. Signs along the roadway, most of them gaudy billboards, but a few hand-painted and charming, advertised airboat tours, alligator wrestling, Mikosuke and Seminole crafts, and campsites. Their vehicle was part of a steady convoy of cars and campers, she'd noticed, many with out-of-state plates, so they weren't the only ones out here after all. "Thank you for this, David," she said. He smiled, still staring straight ahead. "Don't thank me yet. Let's see how you like it." "So what kind of cabin is this? It has electricity, right?" "There's a generator. It's like a tiny house. The way he described it, bathroom, kitchen, a bed with a mattress, but there's no TV and no phone. So in our society, I believe that constitutes a cave and a supply of flint, right?" Jessica laughed, but the idea of not having access to a telephone for 2 days bothered her. She would miss Kira, and she was certain Bee would want to hear from her. "We should have brought Kira," she said. "I'm sorry she's missing this." "Look at that," David said suddenly, nodding toward a road sign. "Panther Crossing," it read. Jessica felt a thrill surge through her frame, making her sit up straight. "There aren't that many Florida panthers left," she said. "Think we'll see one?" "Who knows what we'll see." They made it 20 minutes early to the Glades Airjet Tours dock in Okeechobee hang on, y'all. These are all new words to me. Okeechobee off Tam Miami Trail. The minimized office with a thatched roof was painted bright cobalt blue, the same shade as the sample airboat elevated on display beneath a billboard in the highway. The colorful billboard pictured a grinning cartoon alligator waving a Western-styled hat as he steered an airboat through a spray of water. On the real-life airboat beneath, 3 weathered mannequins sat in the passenger seats, 2 adult-sized and 1 child-sized. Rain and sun had faded their clothes and any discernible facial features, even their eyes. "Can we spell Tacky?" Jessica asked, shielding her eyes from the midday sun as she climbed out of the van and gazed up at the billboard and the airboat's faceless family. "Watch that idle talk. The guy who owns the cabin runs this place, Jess, and he gave us a good deal." "I hope he can get us a good deal on bug spray," Jessica said, slapping at the huge mosquito that had already found her bare calf. Her palm left a small smear of bright red blood behind. "Damn these things. I thought they disappeared until summer. Are there any mosquitoes in Paris?" "Not that I can recall, no." "Good." David slid on his sunglasses with his middle finger, and Jessica paused to admire his face. He always looked good in shades, but with his jaw set with a sense of purpose, dressed in camouflage patterned shorts and a matching t-shirt, she felt an impulse to drag him into the back seat and molest him. Jessica wondered how long it would take before they were settled on the island, and alone. This was seeming more and more like a good idea. "Y'all the shade early, but that's perfect. How are you? Rick Mantooth, ready to roll on out?" The man who met them on the wooden dock was stocky, crisped red from the sun, especially on the rolls of fatty flesh on the back of his neck. He wore his silver hair shaved in a crew cut. He had a genuine southern accent, the kind Jessica rarely heard south of Ocala and north of Homestead. Most people in between, it seemed, were transplants from places anywhere but southern. Jessica usually told visitors that Miami was more Caribbean than Dixieland, but they were no longer in Miami, she remembered. Their guide sounded like a genuine Florida cracker, one who would be proud to display that title on a bumper sticker. "Mantooth, where's that from?" Jessica asked him. He grinned with rows of straight tobacco-stained teeth. "Seminole on my dad's side. He was a logger. Started running airboats out here before anybody knew what one hardly was. Fact, the cabin we're headed to out is his too. Not afraid of snakes, are you?" Jessica leveled a no-nonsense gaze at Mantooth, then glanced back at David. "What kind of snakes?" Mantooth only laughed, reaching to take her duffel bag from her shoulder and nestle it inside the hollow of the airboat tied closest to them. The painted boat was aluminum, the size of a large power boat, with a monstrous fan propeller and an elevated operator seat at the rear. At the front, it had 2 rows of 4 aluminum seats with foam backs for passengers. While he helped them load, Mantooth explained that airboats were best for traveling through the hammocks and marshes because they could glide across very shallow water. Despite her nervousness at climbing into the unfamiliar boat, Jessica was in such a good mood that she found herself humming all things John Denver's Take Me Home Country Roads. No girlhood camping trip had ever been complete without it. After finding her seat, which was slightly damp, she sprayed herself with the can of Deep Woods Off David had rooted out of his duffel bag. The boat bobbed while David and Mantooth loaded the last bag and climbed on board. The engine started with a deafening rush of wind and the churn of the motor. Mantooth pulled back on a long metal stick beneath his right hand, and the boat lurched backward. "Oh, shit," Jessica muttered, grasping the aluminum handrail. She looked at David, who sat unsmiling beside her. "You okay?" she asked into his ear. He nodded, smiling faintly, and held her hand so tightly that it almost hurt as the boat sped away from the dock. Jessica admired the sight of massive cypress tree trunks growing submerged alongside the boat's path. The trunks were adorned with air plants, like mammoth mutant spiders, much bigger than the ones that grew in their yard. Island's a good 15 miles out, Mantooth said over the airboat's engine. Some of his words were nearly lost in the wind as the boat skated over the water. Take us about 30 minutes in and another 30 when I bring you back. Government owned most of the land, but some of the islands, like mine, are still private. There's plenty of island to keep you occupied for this weekend. Most likely. It's 2-3 square miles. When David didn't respond, staring straight ahead into his impenetrable glasses, Jessica turned around in her seat to shout up at Mantooth, "What kind of wildlife is there?" Mantooth revved the engine to increase the boat's speed. Let's see. Lots of egrets. There's one there. Wood storks, the occasional gators. You'll want to steer clear if you want any waste time mounds since it's late spring. Gator eggs hatching time. Don't try and feed them, that's for sure. Don't worry, Jessica shouted back. No panthers or deer on the island. Sorry. Lots of birds, though. You'll see blue heron and ibis. Fishing's great. I got cane poles in the back of the cabin if you want to try your luck with some bluegill or largemouth bass. There's crayfish, too. You hear that, David? Jessica asked, concerned because he was so quiet. David only nodded, his eyes still straight ahead. Granted, David was usually withdrawn around people he didn't know, but she thought he'd be more interested in hearing what their guide had to say. He was the one who'd brought up fishing before. What could be bugging him? Other than that, it's pretty much like a standard beach, Mantooth went on. Lots of sand for you to take in the sun. Not that either of y'all really needs a tan, I guess. Very funny, Jessica thought, but decided to let the remark slide. With all of these mosquitoes, she called, sounding slightly hoarse, I don't think I'll want to spend too much time lying out there anyway. Yep, skeeter's bad, Mantooth said. There's lots more spray in the cabin in case you run out. Jessica liked Mantooth's easy manner and cheerful features. She would feel much more at ease if she knew she could pick up a telephone or a radio and find him ready to glide them back in his airboat. She found herself wishing he weren't so far away. How come there's no phone? She shouted, and she had to repeat the question because it was drowned out in the noise the boat skimmed over a bed of waterlogged sawgrass. No lines, Mantooth shouted back, and Jessica nodded. We don't need a phone, David said in her ear, the first words he had spoken since the boat began its journey. It's a vacation, remember? As the airboat pitched her deeper into the unknown and the wind whipped her short hair across her forehead, Jessica could think of a couple of hundred reasons she might need a telephone. Snake bite, alligator attack, sunstroke, broken limb, compulsive mother's urge to speak to Kira. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been anywhere without a telephone. Suddenly, she felt as though the boat were transporting her hundreds of miles away from civilization, rather than a few short miles from a roadway that led straight back to Dade County. What if something happens? She called back to Mantooth. He winked at her, his face still broad with a smile. Then you better hold on till about 5 o'clock tomorrow. That's when I'm coming back to pick y'all up. Jessica bit her lip. Listen, do you think you could swing by before then? Maybe just to... David cut her off before she could finish her sentence, wrapping a heavy arm around her shoulder. His abrupt movement annoyed her just a little. Instead of affectionate, the gesture felt almost rough. No need for that, Rick, David called to Mantooth, overpowering her words. I'm sure we'll be just fine. I don't believe this. The light doesn't work, Jessica said, flipping up and down on the exposed switch built into the wooden wall of the cabin, which was in a woodsy, elevated portion of the island. The house was built high on what looked like stilts, probably in case of flooding. They'd climbed 12 steps to get to the unlocked door. David, go run and try and catch that Mantooth guy. I can't believe he left us here without... We have to crank up the generator first, baby. David took off his sunglasses and put them in his t-shirt breast pocket, gazing around the tiny room. There was a bed, all right, queen-sized, made up with a tightly pulled brown blanket in the middle of the open room, devouring most of the space. A small pine table for two was pushed against the far wall, and then there was a tiny kitchen space with a two-burner range and small oven, with a miniature aluminum sink beside them. A portable refrigerator stood in a corner adjacent to the oven. The only ornament in the room was a replica of an 18th century musket mounted on the wall above the table. Jessica sneezed. The room needed airing out. She made her way to the picture window across the east wall, hoping the screen was intact to keep the mosquitoes out. They'd been swarmed with the buggers while their shoes got soggy as they climbed across the grassy shoal to the shore. Through the window, she saw the majestic array of cypress, royal palm, and pine trees, and in the distance, the aqua green of water surrounding them. This would be a nice cabin with some AC. Okay, found it, David called from the kitchenette, and she heard him fussing with machinery. Guess we'll need power for the fridge mainly. The stove is propane. Do we have any? David held up an aluminum can. Ye of little faith. The generator began to whir noisily. Much better, she thought. Some sign of the 20th century. Actually, the room was sort of quaint, built completely from wood. It was clean swept and practical, almost like a lodge. From the outside, they'd been able to make out where the individual logs were secured together to build the walls. Jessica walked past the bed to the bathroom and flicked on the switch. Wooden walls, a smooth wood toilet seat, linoleum floor. The sink was tiny and makeshift, but she was struck by the old-fashioned porcelain tub on brass legs. Nice touch, she thought, but a strangely sentimental detail in such a spare place. Well, David asked her, bending over to unload the fried chicken and the drinks into the fridge. It's cute. Daddy Mantooth has simple needs, I guess. I can't wait to take a look around the island, David said, and the cheeriness from the statement made Jessica notice his improved mood. First, I'm going to find a fishing hole. Rick told me about a marsh near where he dropped us off. A marsh? Which one? It's all marsh. Quiet, you. Here's our plan. I'll hunt and gather, and meanwhile you can pound our clothes with some stones to wash them. A return to the primal couple. The primal couple. It had a nice ring to it. Smiling, Jessica surveyed David's smooth behind as he leaned over the refrigerator. She felt a glow of arousal, but ignored it. It was too damn hot for sex just now. That would have to wait. I'll pound the clothes first, then the permanent press, she said. She said instead, I wonder which marsh is the cold water and which is the warm. Now you're in the spirit. Hand in hand, sticky and stinking from bug spray, they explored. The island was big enough that they could forget, at long intervals, they were on an island at all. On the edges of the water where the sawgrass and partially submerged trees grew, there was no doubt it was a swamp. But then the stretches of fine, dark sand began, followed by the brush and the woods. They found overgrown trails twisting through the wooded areas, and one path led to a rustling water pump built beside an oak tree. Think it works? Jessica asked, enchanted. David began to pump the handle, which squeaked loudly. Then water began to dribble out, growing into a thin stream. On an impulse, she raised her palm to catch the water, which was warm. But when she slurped it, the flavor was fresh and wholly clean, like the island, which smelled of dense growth. David drank too. I like this place, Jessica said. I'm glad. There was movement all around them, lizards, butterflies, scurrying bugs they couldn't see. In the trees above, they could hear the untamed chatter and nagging of birds out of their sight. Jessica saw a quick movement on the ground in front of her, and she glanced just as quickly to see a small brown rabbit hide behind a fallen pine tree. She'd actually never seen a wild rabbit. There's your dinner, David whispered in her ear, and she slapped his shoulder, scolding him. Then David kissed her lips. After he'd pulled his mouth away, they wrapped their arms around each other and tightly and pressed close, waiting for the simultaneous moment when the heat and perspiration between them would force them to let go. They waited a long time, standing in the shade of oak until it seemed the moment would never come. Just a minute, I want to check ahead and see how much we can get done in the remaining time. Okay. Their lovemaking steered between moments of tenderness with David above her with such love on his face that he looked like he was in pain, raw, hard sex that made her cling to the handmade oak bed frame so David's thrust wouldn't send her off balance, flying onto the floor as he pounded her from behind. The sounds they made were part song, part call and response, from gasps to screams to whimpers. As their sounds mingled with each other, the night as their sounds mingled with the other night noises drifting through the open window, with her dripping perspiration and the damp scent diffused inside the breeze of the room, Jessica felt like one of the creatures outside, unashamed in the wilderness, doing what God intended creatures to do. Afterward, they were both breathing hard, their slick chests rising and falling fast, and their flesh burned so hot that they couldn't bear to touch. They fell away from each other and lay still on the blanket, smelling their heavy sex scent, their lower bodies moist from each other. The only light in the room was from the moon. David looked like a shadow beside her, as she thought she could reach her arm out and it would pass right through him. "I love you so much, Jess," he said, a whine. "Me too," she said. He'd only caught one bass for dinner, using bread for bait since he'd forgotten to buy worms. They cut the fish in half after he fried it up. She'd eaten fresh fish and day-old chicken with a slice of bread, and it had tasted like a feast. They'd sat on the cabin steps watching the blaze of the sunset light up their island in an orange bath, while David's radio played static-filled jazz that sounded like a broadcast from a long time ago. "This is a dream," her mind had told her as she witnessed the too-perfect sunset. "I'm going to wake up soon." David turned over in bed facing her. She felt his rapid breaths against her forehead. "I have so many things I need to tell you," he whispered, "but I'm scared out of my mind." She'd expected this. A part of her had realized from the start that the purpose of this unexpected vacation was to give David whatever he felt he needed, whether it was distance or guts, to escape, to tell her more about himself. So even without realizing it, she'd been prepared. His words did not alarm her. She touched his damp hair with her fingertips. "You don't have to be scared." "There's so much you don't know," he said. "I know that," she said, "but I need to, right?" A nearby owl hooted so loudly that it sounded like it was in the room with them, perched at the head of the bed. When the owl fell silent, she noticed the chaotic chirping of the crickets. Everything around them was awake, it seemed. So was she. Her eyes were wide, trying to make out David's features in the dark. "I've tried to imagine a life without you and Kira," David said. "I can't. I hardly remember my life before you. The only future I could bear would be the three of us together, always. But you have to know things about me first. This is going to be so hard. Nothing will ever be harder than tonight." "Hard for you or me?" she asked, trying to make a joke, but she realized that her throat was parched, nearly mute. "Mostly for you, I think." "Maybe I'll surprise you," she said, accepting within herself that she could stand to hear about an affair with another woman, or even a man. She could, so long as it was over. If David was bisexual, so be it, as long as he was honest. He didn't cheat, and they could fulfill each other's needs. She could stand to hear about a criminal record even, which might explain his financial independence. Hell, the Kennedys had been bootleggers and nobody hassled them. That story about an inheritance from David's father had never rung completely true to her, or to be. People can change, she told herself. Jessica decided she could stand to hear any of those things because none of that would be worth losing David over, not even close. David took a long, labored breath. "You remember when I fell out of the tree?" he whispered. "How my bruises went away?" The bruises. Jessica's lips parted. She realized that David was going to take her to a deeper place than she had imagined, a place she herself had buried since his fall. She felt scared. "I remember," she said. "Well, I saw the look on your face, the wondering, and you've probably noticed other times too how I don't stay scratched. You've noticed, haven't you?" "I've noticed." Jessica became aware of how hard her nipples had grown, teased by the breeze. The back of her neck felt hot. "There's a reason for that," David said. "I have a very unusual makeup. Not just me. There are others like me. Mahmoud is another. There's something different about our blood." Jessica allowed his words to wash over her, and she struggled to hold her panic at bay. What could be different about his blood? "Are you sick?" she asked. No, he said soothingly, brushing his palm across her collarbone. "I'm perfectly healthy, I promise you that. It only means that I heal very quickly, that I never get sick. Wounds vanish overnight. That's why I avoid doctors. I already understand my blood's chemistry, and doctors would only be confused." Unless she imagined it, Jessica was certain she could hear the thumping of David's heart near her. Yes, she could. Or was it her own? She wanted to hug him and tell him it was all right, that he didn't need to go on, but she wanted to know more. "So, that's your big secret?" "Part of it," David said. "What's the other part?" "I'm with you so far." She heard him swallow hard. "What you have to understand is, I'm sharing something with you I've never shared with anyone. Not because I cherish secrecy, but because I've been instructed not to. This is also delicate, Jessica." Who told you not to? Is it like a government thing?" The question sounded silly to her, but what else could it be? "No," he said. "Not like that. It's hard for me to explain. In fact, I can't really explain. Not verbally. If I told you everything now flat out, you'd think me insane. You'd have me put away. But the alternative will be very traumatic for you. And I'm sorry for that. I wish I knew of another way." "David," she said, "now you're scaring me." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." For a long time they were silent. Jessica no longer heard the generator or the flurry of nocturnal life outside. All she heard was the silence of her waiting. Their hearts danced. "You know," he said, "this is one instance I'm glad you're a woman of faith. I really am. I'm going to ask you to believe in something tonight that your mind will tell you not to believe, but you must. I can't tell you how imperative that is. You must know that I would not lie to you, that you can have faith in my word to you, and in the morning everything will be all right. Just like I told you when I fell from the tree. Do you remember that?" Jessica nodded, not speaking. "We're going to make a passage tonight, Jessica. Both of us. Our faith in each other and our love will be our light on this path. By morning, we'll have witnessed a true miracle. I guarantee you that. We will." Jessica couldn't think of anything to say. She realized that her toes and knuckles were curled tight. Her entire frame was tense. David had never spoken this way to her. No one had ever spoken this way to her. Her mind was too unsettled to process what he was saying, to respond at all. Abruptly, David sat up. She saw him hang his head, staring to the floor. She saw him wipe his eyes. Then, painstakingly, he stood, naked at his full height beside the bed, a far-off shadow. "Mi vida," he said. "I have to stop talking now. I'm going to draw myself a cool bath and sit in the tub for a few moments, okay?" Jessica was relieved. Taking a bath was a very normal thing to do, and the thought of the routine returned her to a sense of reality that had been fleeing as David spoke. "Sounds like a good idea to me," she said. He leaned over the bed and kissed her forehead so gently she could barely feel his lips. "We'll talk a little more later. And remember, by morning, everything will be fine, just like before. I promise you." Jessica watched him walk in darkness to the bathroom. He closed the door. Then she saw warm light stream across the wooden floor. It seemed to her that a long time passed before she heard him turn on the water for the tub. In that time, inexplicably, she had the sense that she could open the bathroom door and he wouldn't be there at all. Dawit sat on the rim of the tub, struggling to calm his shaking fingers as he grasped the hunting knife he'd hidden beneath the tub earlier, while Jessica was reading outside. He saw his own face, elongated and exaggerated, reflected in the shiny blade. Tonight, he would experience his personal moment of self-discovery. Among his life brothers, a small number had learned to worship and conquer pain. They conducted drumming ceremonies with swords and knives, amputating their own limbs, sawing through flesh and bone with maniacal grins on their faces. They culminated with disembowelment, mimicking what they had all witnessed Khaldun perform on himself the first night in the temple. A few of them went further, subjecting themselves to decapitation, a gruesomeness that turned Dawit's stomach. The severed head always withered away, and over a period of 24 hours, a new one grew in its old stump. During its formation, the new head was a mass of bloody flesh and bones. For some reason, severed heads always grew back without hair, even eyebrows. Bald life brothers, the beheaded, were highly respected. These acts were considered the height of bravery. Each rebirth, these exhibitionists believed, helped cleanse their souls. Dawit had always considered them foolish, and Khaldun himself never watched their bloody rituals, dismissing them as childish spectacle. But Dawit recalled their ceremonies and grins now, and he admired their courage. Dawit had considered many methods of proving his condition to Jessica: a gunshot to his head, poisoning himself, leaping from a great height. No method, he believed, would be so effective as what Khaldun had done. His recovery would defy all explanation, and she would have no choice but to believe. The tub was already a quarter filled with water. He must hurry, since the beating water was meant to cover the sound of his own cries. He, who had killed so many, must find the will to commit the same butchery against his own flesh. He must not shy away from the pain. He must welcome it. He must revel in it. Dawit extended his arms fully outward, grasping the knife with both hands, its blade pointing at his belly. The Japanese variation was harikari, the ultimate act of sacrifice. His life brothers called it the cleansing, a union with the knife. "I do not fear the pain. I do not fear the pain," Dawit said aloud. A full minute passed. Then he plunged. "David, did you call me?" Jessica wondered if she had dozed off, but she wasn't sure. She heard the water running in the bathroom, the monotony of the sound growing overbearing. She was more sleepy than she'd imagined she would be, considering the strange things David had just said. Even though he'd only been gone a few minutes, that's what it felt like anyway. She couldn't be sure. Already their conversation had taken on a surreal texture in her memory, as though just maybe she dreamed it. Suddenly, a practical consideration swept Jessica's consciousness. Bad news to complement bad news. She'd left her birth control pills at home, and she hadn't taken one that morning. Damn. She was so good about remembering. But David hadn't thought to pack her peach-colored daily dispenser, and she hadn't thought to check. Realistically, she could get pregnant this weekend. Her doctor had warned her that the mini pills she used, which didn't have estrogen, needed to be taken religiously at the same time every day to be effective. So much for that. David's sperm was roaming unchecked inside her now. But that thought, as soon as it came, was forgotten. David's sperm, David's blood. If something was different about David's blood, did that mean it might affect Kira? Did he have some sort of genetic defect, like sickle cell anemia? Was it something Alex should study? I never get sick. Wounds vanish overnight. Jessica's naked body was overrun by goose pimples. He had much more to tell her, he'd said. What could it be? What could sound more crazy than what he'd already said? She no longer knew what to prepare for. There was no way to prepare at all. Again, Jessica was certain she'd heard David's voice from the bathroom, not calling her exactly, but a sound. David? She called, propping herself on her elbows. Only the stream of water answered. She wondered for the first time exactly how long he had been in there. It seemed to her that the water had been running for a long time. Maybe 15 minutes? Why'd he seem like he'd been gone so long? Suddenly, Jessica thought of Uncle Billy in her mother's tub, dying, the water running over the rim and into the hallway. She remembered the way Bee had described the bloody gash at his temple. The thought scared her. She felt a momentary panic as she realized she was alone and nude in a strange place in the dark. Why hadn't David answered? Jessica found David's t-shirt at the foot of the bed and slid it over her head, wearing it inside out. She slipped her feet into the Nikes, which were still damp from the afternoon, and stood up to shuffle toward the bathroom. This close, the sound of the water was nearly deafening. She knocked twice on the door. David? I thought I heard you say... It's okay, buddy. That was me. David? I thought I heard you say something. The door was unlocked. She eased it open and peeked inside. David had fallen asleep in the tub. His head turned away from her, and the running water was creeping up to his chin. Another inch and he'd be running water onto the floor, just like with Uncle Billy. How had David managed to turn the water pink? Jessica took 2 steps forward. She meant to turn off the faucet. She meant to lean over and tousle David's hair to wake him. She thought it might be nice to climb in with him. That was when David's head snapped around and she finally saw his face. He was slack-jawed, his eyes wide but fluttering oddly. Though he was looking right at her, he wasn't seeing her. He raised his arm from the tub, pulling out a dripping knife he allowed to clatter to the floor. The water wasn't pink, she could see now. Near David, it swirled deep red. The closer she moved, the more red and murky the water. The red was coming from him. I'm sorry, Jessica, David gasped. She stared back down at the knife and she knew. Jessica couldn't stop screaming. And for want of time, thus endeth the story. You've heard an excerpt from My Soul to Keep by Tananarive Due. Obviously, there is a lot more to Dawit/David's story. And for those of you all who are interested or invested, I would sincerely recommend that you pick up a copy of this book. Now, I think it's a little unfair to leave you guys hanging quite this much. So we are going to pick up on Thursday with the next, let's see. We just finished off what would have been the beginning of chapter 29. So on Thursday, we're going to take it through another few chapters because my editorial staff has assured me that the sections that we pulled out do leave you with a nice, satisfying chunk of story. But for what you heard tonight, how you feeling about it? Let's take some of the few remaining minutes that we have to get some of the responses. All right, so Terry Meredith wanted more. Looks like she's got another book on her to buy list. Angela Lee Rains seems to be moved by it. Terry's clowning me for my pronunciation, as is her way. Let's see. What other comments do we have here? Tammy, thank you, Brenda Carroll Jackson Harvey. Yeah, some of this stuff is just like you reading it brand new for the first time, and I'm like, it's too many vowels. Too many vowels. Need some extra consonants to break some of that up. Kitty Foxy is still upset about tea cake. I am too. I'm sitting here like the whole time I'm reading it, I can see Donnie out of my periphery, and I'm like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Erica Yolita Goodman, while giving me a side eye via the proxy of our soon-to-be vice president, said that was so good and riveting. A moose boo. I am tickled. I am officially tickled by that particular comment. That one did it for me. Tony Agent, good to see you around, man. I don't know if you're still with us, but good to see that you were here. And somebody may well be getting pregnant. Somebody may well be getting pregnant. Our friend Joker says she's not supposed to be buying anything else, but guess what she's about to do? Sounds like a few of y'all will have my soul to keep on your reading list. And listen, for me, that hold up. That's the reason why I don't know if y'all heard Don Cheegle barking, but that knocking, that's the only time he barks. The only time Donnie will bark is if somebody knocks at the door, and he doesn't even give you like a real bark. He's just kind of like, he gives you like a half a bark, and then he just kind of like he wants you to know he's not pleased. But yeah, check them locks. But listen, back to Joker's comment that she's not supposed to be buying anything else, but guess what she's about to do? Really, that is one of the great joys of hosting this program and reading these stories and introducing you all to new work, or for some of you just just presenting work that maybe you've heard before or were familiar with before, but hadn't thought about in a long time. But to reawaken that love and that passion for Black books and Black literature, that's why we're here. That's why I do this. It's one of my great loves of bringing you story time with Julian every week, twice a week. My request as we draw this evening to a close is that you please invite your friends to come out. One of the best ways that you can support Storytime with Julian, other than liking, share, is to share. Once you've liked the page, share the page. Once you're about to attend a read, make a watch party. I know that not everybody's going to pull up, but I can't tell you how invaluable your sharing and your word of mouth is to the growth of this community. And as this community grows, so too do our opportunities to present and to do more. So please go ahead. Here are all of our links. This is where you can find us. Do this kind of across all the platforms. Please, if you will, means the absolute world to me. I really can't thank you enough. I want to get to a couple of the last few comments. We've got, let's see, what are we looking at time-wise? We are just about at the end of the show. But Erica Yolita says that the description of the Everglades brought her back to her childhood when they would take field trips there. I can't front. It sounded dope. It sounded absolutely dope. I'm generally not a fan of that kind of thing, but I like the sound of it. Angela and Kitty Foxy both still really upset about the passing of Tea Cake. I would that I could give you some advance information, but look, we're going to find out together what the ultimate, because depending on what happens here, presumably they got to get home, right? So we'll see. For those of you all who are interested in picking up your own copy of Tananarive Due's My Soul to Keep, which is one book in a trilogy. So I'm going to just tell you now, first hit is free. After that, you're going to have to support your own habit. I don't know if we'll have the other two books or if we'll even complete this one, but I'm going to definitely follow up with y'all on Thursday, and we'll see what comes in the future. But for those of you who want to pick up this, you can go to Black Pearl Books, and there is a link for those of you who are on Facebook. You can click that link. For those of you who are not, just go to blackpearlbookstore.com and search the title of this book. Again, the title of the book is My Soul to Keep. The author is There we go. You can see it for yourselves. All right. All right. This has been Story Time with Julian. It is my absolute pleasure to read to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure to bring these works to you every week, every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 p.m. Please, ma'am, please, sir, tell a friend. And thank you for coming through tonight. Please stick around for the credits, and I'll see y'all on Thursday. Peace.